Hello and welcome to pen spinning notation for beginners. What is pen spinning notation, you might ask? Well, it's how we spinners actually write down our tricks and links to be understood by other spinners without video. If you've ever seen notation breakdowns of pen spinning combos, you might have been a little intimidated by them, and rightfully so. It looks like nonsense. By the end of this video, you should be able to understand this notation and even write your own. The basic structure for writing notation goes as follows. Let's start with the trick. Knowing the trick name is probably the first thing you learned when pen spinning. Some examples of trick names are thumb around, charge, pass, and sonic. There are also many more as listed on the screen. Writing just the trick name is normally not enough to convey your message through notation. So next, let's look at slots. In notation, we need to understand where the pen mod is located. To do this, we use letters and numbers to represent the fingers and parts of the hand and arm. Next, let's move on to the slots where the mod could be. The fingers and other parts of the hand and arm are written as letters or numbers to represent the different slots. When writing where the mod is located, we must write the locators in a specific order to be as clear as possible. The order must be written in arm, elbow, wrist, hand, back of hand, palm, thumb, thumb flap, index, middle, ring, pinky, air. For example, slot 2-3 is notated correctly when slot 3-2 is incorrect. It's possible for tricks to only have one slot. One example is charge. But most tricks have a starting slot, some number of intermediate slots, and an ending slot. Normally, we only have to write the starting and ending slots, unless it's not clear what the trick is without. To notate a change in slots, we must write a dash in between. An example of this is sonic 2-3 to 1-2. This means we perform a sonic starting in slot 2-3 and ending in slot 1-2. Technically, there are 5 different slots, but we only have to notate 2 for simplicity. Some tricks need an intermediate slot to be notated, such as flush sonic, otherwise it's unclear what the exact variation is. If we want to notate more complex notations, noting 3 or more fingers, or finger crosses, sides or fingers, then check out my other videos explaining this in more depth. I'll touch on these to some degree later in this video, so keep an eye out for that. Next, let's go on to prefixes. Prefixes are a type of modifier that modifies the trick, making it a different trick entirely, and is put beforehand. There are several different modifiers, some of which include antipodal, curled, fingerless, inverse, mirrored, moonwalk, side, and tipped. There are some others, but these are the most common types. Antipodal reflects the trick along the horizontal plane perpendicular to the hand. Curled normally means the trick is performed with curled fingers on the joint sections here. Fingerless is when the push of the trick is not done by a finger push and uses already existing momentum and/or hand or wrist or arm motion. Inverse reflects the trick along the vertical plane parallel to the hand. Mirrored reflects the trick along the vertical plane perpendicular to the hand. Moonwalk means the slots are in reverse order, but everything else about the trick is the same. It's not needed for English notation when notating slots instead. Side is when a finger on the inside of the pen switches to the outside. Tipped is when the elementary notation wiper is removed. An elementary notation wiper is when the pen goes in this type of motion. Prefixes can be combined, changing the trick even more. For example, an inverse side sonic is when the first sonic is made into a side sonic. Then the side sonic is executed flipped along the vertical plane parallel with the hand. Now we have suffixes, which act as the same as prefixes, but are just put after the trick. Some suffixes include cardioid, pop, release, reverse, riser, and still. Cardioid is when there's a wiper in the same direction and slot after a trick. Pop is when there's a 0.5 revolutions on the back of the hand after an aerial spin. Release is when the mod is thrown into the air right after the first push. Reverse is when the trick is played in reverse, opposite direction of rotation and slots. Riser is when the mod first spins on the hand, then gets pushed into the air. Still, similar to moonwalk, is an arbitrary modifier because it's a modifier indicating the starting and ending slots being the same. It should only be used without slot notation. Similar to prefixes, suffixes can be combined to make entirely different tricks. Next, let's look at the transitionals. These signify a change in trick from one to the next, and the whole process starts again. An angled bracket is used to write a change in tricks normally with nothing else. A tilde in pen spinning notation is a hybrid symbol signifying when both of the tricks are interrupted. A tilde followed by an angled bracket is notated the first trick is interrupted and the second trick is normal. An angled bracket followed by a tilde marks the first trick normal and the second trick being interrupted. Next we'll look at palm orientations. This is written before everything else and notated the trick being performed with different hand orientations. First is PU, short for palm up. This is when the palm is facing up. PD is short for palm down when the palm is facing down. Palm side is when the palm is facing the side. Palm side and palm up can sometimes be interchangeable. Next is BS, short for backside, which is when the back of the hand is facing the side inward to the body. This is far less common than the other three. You only need to notate a palm orientation if it changes. If there's no palm orientation, then it's assumed it inherits the previous orientation. Finally, we'll look at rotations. They signify the number of rotations in the trick. We write 0.5 for 180 degrees, 1.0 when it's 360 degrees, and other rotations respectively. A good way to tell if something is 0.5 rotations or more is to see what side of the pen is on what side of the hand when the trick starts and when the trick ends. If one side starts on the palm side and ends on the back side, the number of rotations is probably an odd number of rotations, meaning 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, etc. If the side starts on the end with the same side, then it's probably an even number of rotations, so 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, etc. Rotations are not always necessary as the rotations normally come with the trick, but for certain tricks such as some arounds and more complicated sonics, notating the rotations are needed. Now that we've covered the basics of normal English notation, let's get a little more specific about starting with the slots. Each slot is made up of a base locator such as mod, arm, elbow, wrist, hand, back of hand, palm, thumb, thumb flap, index, middle, ring, pinky, air. Many of them can have suffix type modifiers, meaning another character is put after to notate a change or more specific part of the base locator. These characters are apostrophe for notating a second locator, C for the center of a mod, M for middle of the mod, W for metacarpal, WX for knuckle, X for proximal phalanx, XY for proximal interphalangeal joint, Y for middle phalanx, YZ for middle interphalangeal joint, Z for distal phalanx, T for tip of the finger, B for dorsal face, P for palmar face, S for lateral face, SP for pinky side, and ST for thumb side. You can combine these and put them in the order you best feel fit to do. Just make sure it makes sense, like there's no proximal phalanx for the air, and your index finger does not have a second tip. Also, faces must come after phalanx and joint notation. Next we'll look at bracket notation. A bracket is a special notation to signify something more specific. Whatever slot the bracket is next to is the slot that bracket applies to. The bracket must be right next to the slot unless the bracket is at the end of all the slots, then it's applied to the whole trick. Bracket notation can be many things, one of which is finger cross notation. Check out my finger cross notation video if you're curious about that. Another type of bracket notation is in or out notation, when a finger or some other locator is extended or not. For example, you could say a sonic has the middle finger in, and an inverse sonic has the middle finger out. This could also be notated with touching or not touching notation, notated with equal signs. So for example, the middle finger is touching the palm when performing a sonic, and the middle finger is not touching the palm when performing an inverse sonic. You could also use these to notate the other locators touching, such as TT is equal to 3T, to notate the tip of the thumb touching the tip of the ring finger. Some more bracket notation is one approaching, one moving away from, both approaching, or both moving away from. There is also push, spin, catch notation, which can be combined with other types of previous bracket notations, such as push FC23 and push 3 approaching palm. For spin, you would need to put the rotations. Let me know if you want me to make a separate video on push, spin, catch notations. There are also some more uncommon bracket notation, such as defining the plane and probably some others I'm unaware of, but these are the most common. That's about it for the basics of pen string notation. Let me know if you think there's anything I missed, and check out my other videos on more specific pen string notation and other pen spinning content. Thanks for watching. See you next time.